Hey everybody, what is going on? How's everybody doing on this Friday evening? Thank you so much for joining me again for another live stream here. Tonight we're going to do something cool. We're going to kind of pick up where we left off last week. Last week we talked about channel strips. This week we're going to talk about tape machines. And maybe next week we're going to talk about console emulation and saturation and those kinds of things. So there's a method to my madness. So I hope you guys are excited. Before we get started, let's do a couple of housekeeping things. First and foremost, make sure that if this is your first time here at one of our live streams, because we get a lot of new people who have signed up recently on our email list at Home Recording Made Easy, so therefore they know about the live stream through email communication, and this might be your first time. If it is your first time, let us know in the chat, and welcome to the family. Glad you're here. Hopefully you'll enjoy tonight's live stream. Also, make sure that if you're new, that not only you subscribe to the YouTube channel, but also on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Make sure you're following me on social media so you know when new things are coming about, and there's new content coming out every single week, 2 or 3 times a week, as a matter of fact. Along the bottom of the screen here, you'll see that, again, keeping in spirit with our analog plugins and our analog kind of mixing with channel strips, and this week tape machines. Mixing with analog style plugins made easy. 25% off if you would like it. Use the coupon code ME25OFF. I'm sure Dave, my good buddy and moderator, will help out by putting that in the chat. So make sure you check that out. Again, if you really want to learn more about these plugins and how to effectively use them, whether it's channel strips, tape machines, console emulators, saturation, EQs, compressors, and all other things that have to do with achieving an analog mix, you definitely want to check out Mixing with Analog Style Plugins Made Easy. It is a killer course. 25% off. Use the coupon code. And last but certainly not least, if you like these live streams and you find them helpful to you, feel free to use the super chat. I will take questions as we move forward after tonight's demonstration. There'll be a ton of questions, I'm sure, coming in. If you want your question to rise to the top and make sure that I see it, because it's difficult to manage the chat with so many people here, a super chat will allow you to do that, and I'll be able to see it, and I'll make sure your question gets asked or answered first and foremost. So let's jump over to the chat, speaking of the chat, and let's see who is here tonight. And I'll scroll over here and get out my trusty iPad. Let me go back to the top here. So we have Michael Johnson. Hey, Michael, what's going on? David S.J., moderator and good buddy. Hey, Dave, thanks for so much for rushing home from work and getting on here to help out. That's great. Thank you. Donnie's here. Hey, Donnie, what's up? Good to see you. I haven't talked to you in a bit. Eric's here. Hey, Eric, how you doing? Joel is here. Hey, Joel. Randall is here. Randall, what's going on? Alistair's here. Alistair, how you doing? Jim Chisholm's here as well. Hey, Jim, what's going on? What tape are you all using? I currently been using the soft tube tape. Well, we're going to look at four I think different ones tonight. We're not going to look at all the tape machines I have, but I'm going to show you 4 of them. Soft tube's not one of them, but that's a great tape machine. Let's see. Alberto's here. Hey, Alberto, what's going on? Tony's here. Hey, Tony, how are you? Hope everyone is well. Let's see. Arrow Proof, hello from Alabama. Hello from Alabama. And Robert Earl Davis is here. Robert, how are you? Good to see everybody here. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions, you could certainly ask now. We'll wait a couple of seconds before we jump on into Studio One, just to give some people a couple of minutes to file in. We're just a couple of minutes behind or ahead of the hour here. And then we'll jump on into Studio One. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I hope you're all doing well. The weekend is here, and that's going to be really cool. So hopefully you'll get to spend some time in your studio and make some good music this week. So if you have any quick questions, now's the time to ask about anything in general. We have another YouTube video came out today where I did a shootout with some more plugins. This week was Universal Audio, the 1073 Neve plugin emulation versus the 1084. Hopefully you guys had an opportunity to check that out. Earlier in the week, we did another 1073. We continued on with the 1073 plugin shootout. We looked at the Lindell. We looked at a couple others this week. I forget, there's so many of them. Hopefully you guys have time to take a look and check out those 2 videos and let me know what you think. Marcus, hey Marcus, what's going on, man? So hopefully you guys will be checking that stuff out. And also there was a podcast episode launched the other day as well. You can check that out at homerecordingmadeeasy.com. Check out the podcast. I think we're up to 18 or 19 episodes at this point. Really great information. If you want some cool information around studio gear and DAWs and plugins and mixing and mastering and recording, and even some episodes talking about the business of running a home studio business, the podcast is something you may want to check out. So it's at Home Recording Made Easy. Top of the page, you will see podcast. Let's see. Tony says, hey, thanks to David SJ for your recommendation last week to replace my hard drive with an SSD. Corrected Studio One taking forever to load and unload songs. That's awesome. Yeah, anytime you can upgrade from a mechanical hard drive to a solid state drive, an SSD, you will definitely get better performance and have an easier time opening and closing things. That is for sure. So let's get into Studio One here. Let me get my session open here, and then we will get this up here. You should see on the screen in a moment or two. I'll get my headphones on, and we'll take a look at some tape machines. And we'll talk about tape machines and why you'd want to use them. Last couple of weeks, I've had some people ask me about tape machines. Ask me really what's the purpose of them and why do you want to mix with them? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Hey, Mark, what's going on? Eddie's here. Hey, Eddie, what's up, brother? How are you? Thanks for being here. So last week, if you didn't see the live stream from last week, by the way, it is still up on it's up on the channel. You can see it, Mixing with Channel Strips. Go check that out. This is going to kind of be a continuation of that. And we looked at 4 or 5 different channel strips last week, and I've taken all the channel strips off this session. We're looking at the same session. The only channel strip that I left on, but right now is shut off, is the Focusrite by Plugin Alliance, just because it's here and we can listen. We're going to listen to that on with our tape machines and then without it as well, just so you can get a kind of a comparison. So that's what we talked about last week. And when we talked last week about channel strips, and we talked about why we want to use channel strips, and we talked about this whole idea of achieving an analog sounding mix. And when you say analog sounding mix, well, what does that mean exactly for folks that may not know? Well, back from the 1950s, let's say, up until, certainly in the 90s and even in the 2000s, and even still today on some level, although more and more records are being made at home studios and more records are being made digital, but still mainstream artists, but every artist through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s recorded typically in a large format studio, analog studio. And in that studio, you had a variety of analog gear. We talk about the centerpiece of the studio is typically the console, and that's what we talked about last week, the channel strip, whether it was an SSL or an Eve or an API or a Focusrite or what have you, or Waves. If you were in Abbey Road in London where the Beatles recorded, you had some very unique custom-built consoles that were specifically built for Abbey Road. And so if you're recording in that kind of an environment, what is kind of the signal flow? Well, the signal flow goes from the live room where all the musicians are playing, right? All the instruments are mic'd up, drums, bass, guitar, vocals, etc. And those are all being patched in from the live room into typically, there's 2 ways to do it, but a lot of times you'll see it hit an actual multi-track tape machine. Then this isn't always the case. There's really kind of 2 formats. Some studios will go from the live floor into like a 16-track or an 8-track, depending on what era you're talking about, and they would hit a tape machine, okay, a multi-track tape machine. From that tape machine, it would go out of the tape machine into a console, right, into a desk, an SSL, Neve, so on and so forth. Go through their channel strip, right, go through their EQs and compressors on the desk. Certain pieces of outboard gear, so maybe some EQs and compressors like 1176s or LA2As or things, Fairchilds and Pultec EQs, things like that might be inserted into a specific set of tracks on the console. And then from there it would go through the bus section, right? The master bus section of the console. And then it would go out to another tape machine, okay? To a 2-track tape machine, okay? So if you were going full bore, you'd have a tape machine before the console and you would have a tape machine after the console. Now, some studios will just maybe wouldn't have the tape machine before. In other words, we'll go from the live room into the desk, into the SSL, Neve, out of the desk to a tape machine. That's another, another real popular kind of a setup. And so part of the sound of the records from the 50s through the 2000s is as that analog, as that signal, as that audio, as the instruments are being recorded and passed through these pieces of analog gear, it's kind of a pyramid effect. One piece of gear in and of itself adds some color, some warmth, some harmonic distortion, some pleasant distortion to the audio. But when you stack them with a tape machine, a console, an EQ, a compressor, and then another tape machine, you've now run that signal through maybe 3 to 5 different pieces of analog gear, analog circuitry, transformers, so on and so forth. And all of those steps along the way imprint a sonic characteristic on the audio, which is what makes that audio sound pleasing, which is the reason why when you listen to the records that you grew up on, and you had those old big black discs, right, vinyl records, and you listen to them on your turntable and you get used and accustomed to that sound, ever since the age of digital recording, which is what we have today, we're trying to make the digital domain sound like those old records. And what plug-in manufacturers have done over the last probably 10 years, but have really gotten really great at it in the last 5 years, is the technology is such today that we can emulate those pieces of old analog gear that are in these world-famous studios that none of us can afford to go record at, and we can run our signal through that stuff at the mixing stage to imprint some of that same characteristic that I was talking about to make the audio, and hence the mix, sound more like the records and the analog kind of a sound, okay? And that's the brief explanation of it, believe it or not, okay? Again, if you like this kind of stuff and you really want to understand this stuff further, go get Mixing with Analog Style Plugins Made Easy, because the first 3 or 4 videos, we talk at length about that stuff, and we get a lot more in detail, not technical, but just from a philosophical standpoint. So you, as you're using these plugins that we're going to look at last week, this week, and maybe even next week, you'll have a better understanding on how they were designed, how they operate, and how you can most effectively use them and to improve your mix. So go get that course. Dave put it in the chat at least once already. Okay, and get 25% off. Don't forget the coupon code. Now, so last week we looked at consoles, channel strips. This week we're going to look at tape machines. And the reason why you want to use tape is, again, it's another link in the chain to this whole analog style thing. So we're going to look at a few of them tonight. The first one we're going to take a look and listen to. We're not going to look at them. We're just going to listen to them as well. So we're going to take a look at the Slate Digital VTM, or the virtual tape machine. Okay. This is a very popular one. If you have the Slate, any of the Slate subscription packages, you have this. It's a wonderful sounding tape machine plugin. This particular model is very simplistic in its controls. There's not a lot of controls on it, which is good, to be honest. And let me walk you through it quickly. So over on the left-hand side, you have a bypass and a process button. Okay, you have a group where you can group this, which we won't really, we're not going to talk about the inner workings of every one of these. I'm going to give you the highlights. You could go demo all of these plugins, and if you want to see more detailed demonstration, I probably have done a YouTube video for this among all the other tape machines you're going to look at on the channel somewhere. You can, after this broadcast, go search the archive and you'll find them. So just so you know that, okay, so we have an input and an output here. We have meters in the center. This particular tape machine plugin has 2 speeds, 15 and 30 IPS, or inches per second. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second and what the differences between the two are. We have some bias controls here, normal, low, and high. I'm just going to leave it on normal for now. And then if you switch the bias and you change some of these settings, they will change the tonality of the plugin a little bit, just so you know that. And this is just stuff you have to experiment with. But to keep things simple tonight, we're going to keep things kind of at its default, if that makes sense. Now, this particular tape machine is really 2 plugins in one, where they modeled 2 different types of tape machines. As I said earlier, we have the kind of the 16-track or the 8-track tape machine that is prior to the big console. And then we have the 2-track after it, right? Well, this particular plugin models both. You can see with this little toggle switch, we have the 2-inch 16-track mode or the multi-track tape machine emulation. And then when you put this on, like, say, your master bus, you would use the 1/2-inch 2-track mode. Okay, so they both are so it's like two tape machines in one, if that makes sense. And then down here, we have two different types of tape types. Some tape machines we're going to look at tonight will have multiple tape types, multiple formulas. They have the FG456 and the FG9. We're just going to leave it on its default setting. Again, the difference between the tape formulas will change some of the tonal characteristics a little bit, typically in the upper mids and high ends. Okay, so when you get these tape machines, you can play around with different formulas. You can also play with the speed. Let's talk about the inches per second. So this particular model has 30 inches and 15 inches per second. The slower the tape moves, so 15 inches per second means the tape is going to move slower. Typically, the more low-end bump you're going to get and a little bit more compression. Because the one thing you have to understand about tape machines is they are compressors. Kind of, okay? When you hit tape at a slow speed and the harder you hit tape on the input signal on the way in, the more the audio is going to compress, okay? The faster you move the tape, in this case 30 inches per second, it's going to sound a little bit more transparent. It's not going to be as thumpy on the low end, and it's not going to sound as compressed. It's going to sound a little bit more open because the tape is moving at a faster pace. Now, again, if you have the tape moving faster, but you hit it even harder with audio signal, you can shape the sound a little bit. And again, so the thing with tape machines, it really depends on a couple of things. A, what kind of tape formula are you using? They all sound a little different. B, how fast is the tape moving? 15 inches per second, 30 inches per second. And we're going to look at some tape machine plugins in a bit that are at 7.5 inches per second, which is even slower than 15 inches, okay? And how hard are you hitting the tape? How much signal are you driving into it? The harder you hit it, the more squashed and compressed it's going to sound. The other thing that's going to happen, and we're going to listen to all of these, don't worry, is you're going to have a little bit of a roll off on the top end. So tape will take something that sounds a little brittle and a little sterile and a little harsh, and it smooths off the top end. It compresses, okay? So you have to think of it that way. So tape machine, in my mind, the way I think about tape and the way I would like you to think about tape machines is there really two things. One, they act like a compressor, and two, they act like a saturation plugin. They add saturation, a little harmonic distortion, depending on how hard you hit them, and they compress, okay? That's what they do, okay? So this is one of the tape machines we're going to look at tonight, okay? The next tape machine we're going to look at, and I've already kind of preset these up, and I'll show you how I kind of set these up, but I'm going to just show you briefly. The next tape machine we're going to look at and listen to is the Kramer Master Tape by Waves, another great plugin. This is a little different in that this was modeled after a tube-based tape machine, okay? Not solid state, tube, driven by tubes. And that's what this little orange button here does. Gives it a different characteristic in the way it sounds. Tends to sound a little bit warmer. You'll be able to hear that. This particular tape machine has only two speeds, 15 inches per second and 7.5. No 30 inches per second, okay? Just so you're aware. This tape machine also has a feature called Wow and Flutter, and which is more kind of like a delay kind of a thing, which we're not going to play with tonight. It gets a little bit more complex. Not all the tape machines have them, but some of them do. This one does. This also has a thing called the noise control, where you can add additional noise floor and hiss and some of that tape hiss back into the signal to maybe give it a little bit more of a authentic feel, if that makes any sense. And it also has things like flux controls, and there's all kinds of different things they have on some of these tape machines. And again, you can demo all of these tape machines for free. You go out and demo them. You can open up the manual. You can read through them. They are really interesting. And I encourage you that whatever tape machine plugin that you have, or if you don't have any tape machine plugins and you do decide to purchase one, that you do just that. You purchase one and you really learn it and open up the manual and learn what all the controls do. Okay, so that's the second one we're going to look at. The third one we're going to look at is another Waves by Abbey Road. This is the J37, part of the Abbey Roads collection. Okay, similar, it looks a lot different, but a lot of the same features. You have 3 different tape formulas here. Once again, only 2 speeds, 15 and 7.5, no 30 inches per second. You have some of the wow and some of the flutter stuff. This is not a tube-based model like the Kramer Master Tape. Okay, and then you have things you could do with delay and so on and so forth. You have some bias settings. So what you're going to find is every one of these tape machines are going to have some of the same similar controls, and some tape machines will have additional controls depending on the plugin itself. Okay, and then the last one we're going to take a look at tonight is we're going to take a look at the IK Multimedia or T-Rax, the Tape 24. Okay, this one, again, has 4 different tape formulas. This has a 15 inches per second and a 30 inches, just like the Slate, no 7.5. Okay, this doesn't have all the wow and the flutter and all the delay stuff. It's a more modern meaning from 1980. And we're going to take a look and a listen to that as well. Okay, so the first thing I want to do here, right now, all our plugins are shut off, our channel strip, everything. I just want to play back a little bit of this audio with nothing on it at all. Basically, all I've done is just kind of balance the faders a little bit. I didn't do anything crazy. There's no editing. There's no nothing. This is the same session that we used last week when we listened to the channel strips. Okay, everybody with me, I hope? Okay, here we go. So we're going to take a listen, and then we're going to start listening to these different tape machines so you could hear what they do. So here we go. Here's with no processing at all. And let me know in the chat if the audio's good. Okay, so that's with no processing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to listen to the Slate Digital Virtual Tape Machine. Okay, now how I've set these up pretty much is setting up the input and the output. So as I'm cranking up the input, the output is linked to it to turn it down, to kind of level match the plugin. And basically what I'm doing is on all these tape machines that I'm hitting right around the 0 dB mark. I'm not oversaturating. I'm not slamming the death out of these things, although you can, but I'm just trying to hit right around 0 dB just to give it a nice set of a nice healthy signal that's you're gonna hear the audible difference in the tape machine itself, but without going too crazy. I'm setting everything here. I believe on the virtual tape machine I set everything into 30. Let me just double check. I wanted to make sure everything was set to 15. And yeah, they're all set to 15 inches per second, and they're all using the same tape formula, and they're on the multi-track, the 16-track version of this tape machine, okay? So the first one is the Slate Virtual Tape Machine. We'll turn them all on at the same time. If you want to know the order of the tape machines, just so you can write these down, again, it's going to be number 1 will be the Slate Digital. Number 2 will be the Kramer Master Tape by Waves. The third tape machine will be the Abbey Road J37. And the fourth tape machine will be the T-Rax tape machine. Okay, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So here, halfway through here, I will turn on the virtual tape machine so you could hear what it does, and I'll turn it on and off and that kind of thing. So here we go. Okay, so that's the Virtual Tape Machine by Slate Digital. Now, keep in mind when you're listening, if you're not sure what to listen for, a couple of things I can point out is that you want to listen for the lowness of the kick drum, and hopefully you're listening to this back on a decent set of headphones or studio monitors. If you're listening to this on an iPhone or earbuds, you might not be able to hear the low end as easily, if at all. But the low end tends to get a little bit thicker, and on the virtual tape machine, take note that the high end tends to get a little bit more presence. Okay, it almost sounds like it gets a little, it's not really louder, it's just a little bit brighter, it's a little bit more open. Okay, so listen for the kick and listen for the upper end and how it kind of opens up a little bit, okay? So let's try that again. I'm going to start, well, I'll start with it and I'll take it away. When I take it away, it's where you tend to hear things start to fall a little flat. Okay, so there's the Slate Digital virtual tape machine. Now also what you'll hear is you'll hear some of that tonal shift that I talked about. So it almost acts like an EQ as well, doesn't it? So with the tape machine on, it sounds a little bit more compressed. It's a little bit more punchy. It sounds a little bit more present, something that you would kind of shape with an EQ, right? And it adds a little bit of just glue, okay? So when we talk about these kinds of plugins, and we talked about this last week as well with the channel strip, is you have to think of these things, they're kind of doing multiple things. And when you start using them in combination with each other, and we'll do this in a little bit, where the reason why I left the Focusrite is we're going to listen to this with a channel strip as well. And as you start to stack these things, you can really shape the tonality of a mix very easily, okay? And when you know how to put the right combinations of these plugins together, they become very powerful, okay? So that's the virtual tape machine. Okay, let's take a listen now to the Kramer Master Tape. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to start with it off. I'm going to turn on the Kramer Master Tape. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so that's the Kramer Master Tape. So do you hear the difference between the Kramer Master Tape and the virtual tape machine? The Kramer Master Tape doesn't seem to have as thick of a bottom end as the Slate Digital one does. Now, the difference, the way we have this set up is we have this set up at 15 inches per second, much like we do on the virtual tape machine. But this one is, as I said, it's also a tube-based tape machine. And so that in and of itself is going to have a different characteristic and sound. Okay, it's going to smooth things out a little bit. It's not going to be as punchy sounding in the low end as something like the Slate Digital one. It's just two different machines that are modeled. They sound completely different. Okay, let's listen to that again. We'll start with it off and we'll turn the Kramer Master Tape on and off. Okay, so you hear the difference there? A little bit different. And we'll go back and forth between one tape machine and another once we get through all of them and we talk about that, okay? So very different sounding. And I see some of your questions in the chat. Some of these are good questions. We'll ask these again during the question and answer section, Michael, and I'll explain why, okay? If David doesn't jump on them and do that, I will absolutely answer your questions once we're done with the demonstration, okay? Definitely. So definitely don't forget to stick around and to ask. Okay, excuse me. Next one we're going to look at is the J37, okay, by Abbey Road, by Waves in the Abbey Road collection. Okay, so we're going to start the same thing. Here we go.
Changing all around. I know the reasons you arranged and tearing me down. Where does the peacefulness of mine? Where will my heart come back to life? I'm alright as I pick up the pieces that are left in me. I'm alright, feel away from you, and I'll be fine. Cleaning up the corner.
Okay, so there's the J37. Do you hear the difference between that and the last two? Completely different sound. Okay, now again, these tape machines all have different controls. We're using pretty much the same, well, the tape formulas are a little different between each one, but we're using the same speeds, and we're not using any of the other additional controls that kind of make these a little bit more fair comparison. But just hearing the differences between the three models is important, okay? Now, some of these tape machines, people would say, well, you don't really put these, like this tape machine, would you put this across all your tracks or would you just put it on your master bus? Where would you typically put it? There are no rules. You could do whichever you want, okay? I want to give you kind of an accumulative effect of what this kind of sounds like so you can really hear the audible difference. Most times I'll use a tape machine on every track and the master bus, but we'll talk about that after. Okay, so let's listen to that again. So again, this is a J37. We'll start with it off and we'll bring it in.
I know the seasons like change. It's changing all around. I know the reasons you arranged. You're tearing me down. Where does the peacefulness of mine? Where will my heart come back to life? I'm alright as I pick up the pieces that are left in me. I'm alright, feel away from you, and I'll be fine. Cleaning up the corner, put it back in order. Know I will always have this too. A little piece of you.
Okay, so there's the difference. There's the J37. Now, what I hear on the J37, from an EQ tonal perspective, it's pretty transparent, on, off, on, off. Where this is where you really hear the difference with this particular tape machine is this one tends to add a little bit more compression than the other two. Okay, the EQ shift isn't as much, but there's more compression there. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just different, okay? And I don't know how this will come across on YouTube or whether you guys can hear that, okay? What's important about these plugins, beyond the fact that you just look at them and you go, they look cool, and I'm going to put this here, and I'm going to put this here, and I'm going to put this here, is you really need to understand, you really need to be able to tune your ears into what these things can really do. So you could come up with a strategy on how to use these in combinations with other plugins, analog style plugins, okay? That's important, okay? So that's the J37. Now, the last one we're going to listen to is the one by T-Rex. Nice tape machine. This one, of the three or the four that we looked at, this one is the most CPU intensive. We didn't talk about CPU yet. We'll talk about that after. Someone remind me. But that one, the T-Rex is the most CPU intensive. We're using, what, 13 instances of this, and this takes up about 45% of my CPU, where the other ones take up like 2%. So just keep that in mind, that those T-Rex take up a lot of CPU. But anyway, let's listen to this one. We'll turn it on and turn it off. Okay. So there's the T-Racks. Which ones do you guys like better so far? Do you hear the differences between the four? Can you really honestly say, yes, I hear a difference between these. I know which this one sounds like versus what this one sounds like. Okay. That's my goal for you guys. Okay. Is to not only be able to say, I like the way that sounds, but to be able to hear the difference. I mean, this is more of an ear. This is just as much an ear training exercise as it is learning about tape machines and what they do. Okay. Because that's super important as an engineer to be able to have the way to tune your ears into this stuff so you can really hear the differences. Now, talk about CPU usage for a second. So, as I said, we have 13 instances of this on. If I look at my performance monitor, this is 44% CPU usage just using this T-Racks tape machine. Come on, there we go. Okay. Now I have a pretty high spec computer, 64 gigs of RAM, an 8-core processor. It's 3 gigahertz iMac Pro. So just keep that in mind. It's a little bit higher, maybe spec'd out computer than maybe the average person in their home studio. So, you know, if this is only 13 tracks, if you had a 50 track session, you couldn't put this on all of your tracks. Come on, open up. Let's go. This. Okay. You just couldn't. Okay. So what would you do in that case? You would probably just maybe put this on your master bus, or you'd put it on, you'd create a busing system like a drum bus, bass bus, guitar bus, vocal bus, maybe put 4 plugins on as opposed to 13, right? Something like that. Now that's just for this one here. If we take a look at the other plugins, the J37 only has 7%. Okay. A lot less, obviously. Kramer Master Tape, 2%. And the Slate Digital, 3%. Okay. And when you get into, and then again, there's other tape machine plugins I have, but just be aware that certain tape machine plugins will be real CPU heavy. Not all of them, most of them won't be, but just that's something to consider depending on your computer and how you plan to use these tape machines. Okay. So let's just make sure we're aware of that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing we did last week with the channel strips. Is I'm going to start with one, and then I'm just going to turn one off, turn the next one on, turn one off, turn the next one on, all in a row. So you can really hear the differences side by side. So again, the first one is the Virtual Tape Machine by Slate Digital. The second one is the Kramer Master Tape by Waves. The third one is the J37 by Waves, Abbey Road. And the fourth one is the TR5 by T-Racks. Okay. So we'll start with the Virtual Tape Machine by Slate, and then we'll switch them on and off, and we'll see what we got.
I know the seasons about to change. It's changing all around. I know the reasons you arrange. You're tearing me down. Where does the peacefulness of mine? Where will my heart come back to life? I'm alright as I pick up the pieces that I've left in me. I'm alright. Being away from you. I'll be fine, cleaning up the corner, put it back in order. Know I will always have this too, a little piece of you.
Okay. Hear the difference there? So what do you hear? What's the differences between these four? Well, to my ear, the Slate Digital has the most punch. It has the most thicker bottom end, and it has the more open clarity on the top end. It's more of a punchy sound. Okay. It's not as compressed sounding. It's not as mellow sounding. It's not as smooth sounding. It's a little bit more, for lack of a better word, rock and roll. And I know that's kind of a crappy analogy, but you know what I mean. It's a little bit more, Slate. The Kramer Master Tape, to me, of these four, sound the least punchy, the more smooth sounding, primarily because it's a tube-based tape machine. And so they're going to tend to be a little bit more smooth. The J37 to me has a little bit more punch than the Kramer, but it has a little bit more warm upper mids than something like the Slate. And then to me, the T-Racks plugin is more similar to the Virtual Tape Machine by Slate in that it has a little bit more punch on the bottom end, but it's not as aggressive on the top end. They sound completely different from each other, right? Totally different. Okay. Now, if we were to include, now that we talked about the tape machines as the first step, if you will, of the way the signal flows through your first piece of analog gear virtually in a plugin, right? Tape. And then from there, it would typically go to a console, right? We talked about a channel strip. In this case, I just left up the Focusrite from last week, but this could very well be an SSL, an Eve, or anything else. Okay? So what I want to do now is I want to turn on the console, the channel strip, with this particular tape machine. And we'll do that with each one of the tape machines so you could hear the starting of the accumulative effect of what happens when you add not only a tape plug-in, but then a channel strip right underneath it. Now in the channel strip, admittedly, there's some EQ and some compression. But if you were here last week, you'll know that the compression is very light on all of these channels, maybe 3 dB of compression at most. And there's just some basic EQ shaping. There's no, we didn't spend a lot of time going through it and making it perfect. We just kind of quickly dialed it in last week. And if you want to see that whole demonstration, go to last week's video. It's still up on the channel and you can check it out. So let's start with the virtual tape by Slate, and then we'll add in the Focusrite console channel strip. And we'll just see, what does that do?
All around, I know the reasons you've arranged. You're tearing me down. Where is the peacefulness of mine? Where will my heart come back to life? I'm alright as I pick up the pieces that are left of me. I'm alright, being away from you, and I'll be fine, cleaning up the corner.
Okay, so now when we add a little bit of tape machine to a channel strip that's already kind of dialed in with EQ and compression somewhat, you start to hear the audible effect even greater, right? So now I'm going to leave this Focusrite channel strip engaged on, and we're going to cycle through the tape machine so you could hear the difference between what these tape machines do when they're paired up with a channel strip, okay? So here we go. So we'll start with the virtual tape, then we'll go to the Kramer, then the Abbey Road, then the T5. Here we go.
All around, I know the reasons you've arranged. You're tearing me down. Where is the peacefulness of mine? Where will my heart come back to life? I'm alright as I pick up the pieces that are left of me. I'm alright, being away from you, and I'll be fine, cleaning up the corner.
Okay, so when you hear it with the Focusrite channel strip, and we cycle between those 4 tape machines, they are radically different. What do we hear the most? What is the biggest change between them? It's really the EQ curve, isn't it? The EQ curve. And so on its own, without that channel strip, I said the virtual tape machine, to me, out of those 4, just by itself, had a little bit more punch, a little bit more, suiting for this song, sounded a little bit more what I would choose. When you pair it up with the Focusrite, now the T-Rax machine sounds like it fits better with the way that the compression and the EQ is already set up on the Focusrite channel strip. Okay. This is why when you start to use these plugins in combination with each other, before I use a channel strip and I do any EQ and compression, I use tape first. And you say, well, why is that? Well, there's 2 reasons for it. One, because that's really the more authentic, if you will, way that the signal runs through an analog studio. If we're trying to achieve an analog mix and turn our digital audio workstation into kind of a pseudo analog studio, you would typically hit tape first. Unless you were in a studio where you didn't hit tape, it went straight to a console and then tape after, like we talked about earlier. But more importantly, because I know that the tape is going to add an EQ curve to the sound right? And then I'm playing that, and then the next step would be to shape it with any EQ and compression that it needs. Okay, so I'm using the channel strip and the tape machine kind of together to get the overall sound. Okay, so think of the tape machine as almost kind of like the way you may think of a preamp, in that it sets kind of the foundation. Okay, the signal runs completely digital into that first analog plug-in, and it kind of shapes it. It kind of compresses it a little. It evens it out a little bit. It gives it a little bit of vibe, a little bit of color, and it kind of sets the foundation for when you're going to hit your next plug-in, which in this case would be this plug-in here. Okay, and then from there is when you would set your EQ and compression. But I already set this up last week prior to the tape machine. That's why they sound so radically different from one tape machine to another. So can you all hear the differences there? Okay, let's try it again. We're going to keep the focus right on, and we're just going to cycle through the tape machines again. Listen to how the EQ curve is so different between these tape machines when paired up with this Focusrite channel strip. And you let me know in the chat, which one do you like better for this particular song? Okay, so again, we're starting with the Virtual Tape Machine by Slate Digital.
I know the seasons about to change. It's changing all around. I know the reasons you've arranged. You're tearing me down. Where is the peacefulness of mine? Where will my heart come back to life? I'm alright as I pick up the pieces that are left of me. I'm alright. Feel away from you, and I'll be fine. Cleaning up the corner, putting back in order. You know I will always have this too, a little piece of you.
Okay, do you hear the difference there? Okay, now that you know what to listen for. Okay, so this is kind of a process in the way we build this. So whenever you're talking about building an analog mix and using analog style plugins in this way, you have to think of these things as not separate components: tape machine, console emulation, which we'll talk about next week, console, channel strip, saturator, bus compressor, and any other goodies that you want to throw on there. You have to look at them as a unit, as a system, because they all affect each other. And the way you set up the first plugin in the chain, in our case a tape machine, will heavily dictate how you set up the second plugin, the third plugin, and the fourth plugin in the line. Okay? And remember, each one of these kinds of plugins, each one of these tape machine plugins, they do 3 different things. It's not a tape machine plugin. Think of it as 3 plugins in one. It is a compressor. It is an EQ, and it is a saturation plugin all built into one. Most people think a tape is saturation. They think that's the most commonly thing that people think. What they don't realize is that it's a compressor and an EQ. Okay, compression and saturation are somewhat similar, and EQ is as well, because saturation adds tonal shaping, which is what an EQ does. Okay, so start to think about them in this way if you don't already. Think about these tape machines as EQs and compressors. Okay, and that you can shape the sound before you move on to the next one. And if you really want to kind of replicate or emulate the way a studio kind of flows from a signal flow point of view, first plugin is going to be a tape machine. The second plugin is either going to be some kind of a console emulation plugin, which we'll talk about maybe next week, and or then third would be a channel strip like we have here. And then from there, you would go into any other additional EQ and compression that you may want to use that maybe we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. And even though you already have EQs and compressors on the channel strip, there are times, more times than not, where we'll actually add an additional compressor and or an additional EQ even after this channel strip. And you may want to say, well, why would you do that? What would be the purpose to do that? Well, you'll have to come back to that live stream and I'll explain it all to you. We'll talk about that during that demonstration, but there is a method to that madness. And again, if this stuff interests you and you really like this kind of stuff and you really want to understand this even further, go check out Mixing with Analog Style Plugins Made Easy. That's why that course was built. There are so many people, all of us, me included, and everyone in this chat room, unless you're a complete stock plugin person, which is totally cool. There's nothing wrong with that. We all run out, we go out and we buy all these plugins. We buy tape machines and channel strips and saturators and reverbs and compressors and EQs. Buy all these different, we have a Neve, an 1176, a LA2A, a Pultec. We have all these plugins. And no one has ever really taken the time to really instruct you, well, how is the most effective way to use this? Why do you put these plugins on certain tracks? Why do you put them in the order that you're putting them in? There is a method to it to make them most effective, okay? The one thing that's great about YouTube is that we have tons of information out there and lots of people that are showing you these kinds of plugins. I mean, I'm one of them, right? The bad thing about YouTube is there's a lot of people out there showing you, showing all these types of plugins, but very few people show you how to use them effectively and teaches you the philosophy behind them and how they work and what they do to audio when you run through them. And so that's why I'm here, is to try to help, just not show you a nice fancy plugin that the tapes and the wheels spin. That looks really cool. But how to use it, why to use it, and how to think about them. Because once you understand that and you have that under your belt, you can be lethal with these kinds of plugins in a good way on your mixes. And you'll be able to turn out really not only consistent, but very unique sounding mixes that sound really, really pro. The pros that use the hardware tape machines, all the hardware EQs and compressors, the hardware consoles, the pros, the guys that we all know and love, they understand this stuff. They understand the way these things link together. And just like in the analog world, you can do it in the digital world if you know how to do it. And so hopefully that was somewhat interesting to you. Hopefully you guys learned a little something. I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about this in the chat. And then we're going to take a bunch of questions and I'm going to try to answer any questions that I can. So let me get back to the chat room here and let me see what's cooking. So let me know if you guys like that, if you guys found that interesting. And maybe next week we'll talk about, like I said, maybe console emulation is probably the next step to talk about along with this. So how many people we have floating around here? 80 some odd. Really, really cool. If that number is accurate. I don't know, Dave, is that number accurate? Let's take a look at some questions. Go ahead and ask those questions if you could. K-Box Studios. Hey, K-Box Studios, how are you? You can also, you can put this also on the bus to add warmth? Yes, of course. We didn't talk about the master bus or buses, but yes, that would be another layer of this. Maybe we'll talk about that in another week. Again, I talk a lot about that in the training course, but yes, that is another level. Or another stage of warmth or compression. Yes, it's putting them on buses and then master buses. Absolutely. You're absolutely right about that. Okay. Yes, Dave's saying, post your question. I was going to start right from here and just kind of read down. So if you had a question before, type it again. We will get to it, I promise. Hello, Brazil. Oh, you're typing in a whole nother language. I can't read it. I'm sorry. Let's see. Michael says, would there be a benefit to tracking through a tape emulation? Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. You can track through tape emulation. There's nothing wrong with that. You could track through tape emulation, track through an EQ and a compressor. But when you're going to track through that stuff, I would just suggest to you to do it in a subtle way. Just, don't overdo it. Don't overcook it. Because once you recorded through it and you baked it into the track, it's there. You can't get rid of it unless you re-record the track. But yes, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. Let's see. Donnie says, you're right, David. It depends on the song and what the artist is looking for. Not only that, but how acceptable to the artist. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Right. So I'm just showing you some general concepts and techniques. A lot of it is song dependent, the way the track was recorded, what kind of vibe are you going for, what combinations of plugins are you using. Again, we're talking about this as a system. What channel strip are you going to use? Well, if I'm going to use a certain type of channel strip and it's, let's say, a country tune, I might lean towards one tape machine or another, depending on the overall way it was recorded and ultimately what am I looking for or what is the artist looking for. So that's one of the benefits to having multiple tape machines, multiple channel strips, multiple compressors, and multiple types of EQs in your plugin arsenal, because you have options. Because as you heard tonight, just like you heard last week, they don't sound the same, right? Which is good, because I would really suck if I had 5 tape machines and they all sounded identical. That's if I bought them 4 times too many, but they're completely different. Now, as I said earlier, for people that might be new, if you don't have a tape machine plug-in at this point, don't go out and buy 5. Go out and demo them and pick one and use one for a while. Really understand all the inner workings and some of the settings and things that we really didn't discuss tonight. Get under the hood, read the manual. Most people don't read plugin manuals. They don't even understand what half the controls do, okay? You need to understand what they do, and you need to practice with them. So that's what I would suggest you do. Which one you pick is totally up to you. It almost doesn't matter. You can use any of them, and you can shape them to make them, pardon me, sound the way you'd like. That would be my recommendation. David says, the man from Brazil posted, hello, I want to learn to play tape in Brazil. Okay, but I don't know almost anything about learning from the beginning. Okay, so if I understand, if you're learning from the beginning, in the recording world and in the mixing world, then you want to check out some of the beginner courses that I have. I don't know if you can let us know maybe what DAW you're using, but you can let us know that, and I can kind of guide you to maybe what courses to check out. But a couple to keep in mind if you're looking for recording, you can, and if you're a Studio One user especially, you can check out Recording in Studio One, Artist Made Easy. And if you're not a Studio One user and you're looking for some mixing training, you can check out something like Mixing Made Easy Volume 1 would be a good course for you to start with. Also, because I don't recognize your name in the chat room, so my guess is that you're new. If you haven't been to homerecordingmadeeasy.com yet, go over there and get the free mixing mini course that's right on the homepage. That is a very entry-level mixing course. That might be something you may want to check out as well, and it's for free. So you can check it out on the website, download it, and you can check that out, and that'll kind of get you going in the right direction. And then from there, we can help guide you to what your next set of training should be. Okay, so hopefully that helps. Let's see. Thanks, Dave, for translating that. Bobby says, hey, Bobby, what's up, brother? To me, tapes also have a little bit more distortion on the guitars. Yeah, if you hit them hard enough, they will add distortion to guitars. Absolutely. Especially distorted guitars, right? Not clean guitars, but distorted guitars. Yes, they will, if you hit them hard enough. And that could be a desirable effect. You know, if you want to get some saturation and you want to crunch things up a little bit more, you can hit a tape machine harder, and that will achieve that as well. That is absolutely true. Let's see. K-Box, God bless your studio. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Any other questions? Hit them down below. If you guys were asking questions earlier on and I wasn't able to get to them, you can go ahead and retype them, and I'd be glad to answer anything I can for you. Now's the time to ask. Let me know if this is something you want to do again next week. Do you want to continue on with this kind of method of training and mixing? We could talk about console emulation next week, if that's something that interests you guys. If not, then we won't. How about that? But there's lots of layers to this, right? There's lots of layers to this. And so we can do this 3 or 4 or 5 weeks in a row and kind of build this. Eddie says, hey, Eddie, do you recommend to have the same tape plugin for channels and the master bus? Typically, I personally do that, but that doesn't mean you can't mix it up. It doesn't have to be that way. You could try it and you can mix them up. What I would tell you is, if I was putting them across all my tracks, that I would use the same tape machine. Although, again, you don't have to. You can use, if you had 3 different tape machines, you can have your drums going through one tape machine, your guitars going through another, and your vocals going through a third different machine. But to me, that doesn't emulate really what would happen in an analog studio. An analog studio would have a tape machine, not 3 different makes and models that everybody would run. You know, they wouldn't run it like that. But that doesn't mean you can't, and you could come up with some unique sounds that way if you want to. But to answer your question specifically, if I was putting the virtual tape machines across all the tracks, I'd probably put it on the master bus as well. Probably. Unless when I got done through the mix, I went through my tape machine, my console, my channel strips, my EQs, my compressor. And as I was building my mix, if I got to the end of the mix and I said, you know, the mix sounds really great, but it doesn't have enough, top end to it. Maybe I would swap out the tape machine for a tape machine that I know is going to be a little bit more open on the top end, as opposed to just taking an EQ and boosting it. Okay, because they sound different. Okay, so I may then swap out the tape machine. Depends. It depends. Let's see. Let's see. David says, David, talk about using tape machines on sends and buses and channels. Oh, okay, yeah. So I wouldn't typically use it as a send. Me personally, I wouldn't send a track to a tape machine, although I guess you technically could. Typically also, if I have a busing system set up where I have, let's say, all my drums going to a drum bus and my guitars going to a guitar bus and my vocals going to a vocal bus, there's two things you could do. You could put the tape machine, let's say, on all your individual tracks and not put them on your buses. Although if you have, as I said a little earlier, maybe some computer related CPU issues, don't have enough horsepower under the hood because your session is too large, you can just put the tape machine on the buses if you need to. Sometimes I'll put them on both. If I want a little bit of that extra color, that little bit extra saturation, I may even put them on both. I may put them on all the individual drum tracks and then put that same tape machine on the drum bus. And maybe I don't hit it as hard. Maybe I just kind of kiss the needle a little bit just to run the signal through the plugin. It's going to add a little bit more harmonic color to the sound. So that's another thing that you can do. Okay, that's and you can mix and match things any way you want, but that's another option. So, if you need to use the buses because you don't have the horsepower to put too many plugins across your session, that is certainly better than not using a tape machine at all. Or you can do both. If you have the horsepower, I recommend you try doing them on the tracks and on the buses just to see what the sound difference is. Certain songs you may go, wow, I really like the way that sounds with certain mixes. And other mixes you may say, oh, it's a little bit too much. It's too much because again, what are you adding? You're adding a whole nother layer when you put them on the tracks and the bus. You're adding a whole nother layer of what? Compression and saturation, right? So you got to be careful of that you don't over compress things and oversaturate things, and then things will get to be a big jumbled mess, So you got to be kind of careful about that. But it is something to definitely experiment with it. Good question, Dave. Dave says, yeah, if we do this enough weeks, you'll have given away the whole analog course for free. Well, not really, because there's a lot more in that course that I won't go into. I cannot go into on YouTube. It takes too long, but I hear what you say. I'm not going to give you all the free keys here on YouTube. You got to get the course, but the course it's a fantastic course. I may say so myself. I really took a lot of time to develop that course, and I've gotten nothing but I've never gotten a single even mediocre review of it. It's always been stellar reviews from anyone that's purchased it, and I've gotten hundreds upon hundreds of reviews on that course, and people really love it. You should check it out if you use these kind of plugins. Let's see. Bobby says, the teacher, teach whatever. I'm here to get better at mixing. Okay. Thanks, Bobby. I got you. It took me a second to read the question. Let's see. Alistair says, hey, Alistair, if I send a mono signal from Studio One into the Slate Digital virtual tape machine, can I assume that I only reflect on the left meter of the plugin? I'm sorry if this feels like a silly question. No, because on the if you have a mono track, that particular tape machine is going to be you should see you're going to it's a mono instance of the plugin. So you have 2 meters. Let me look over here. Every tape machine will be a little different, but no, you should see it on both. You should see on that particular tape machine. You should see it on both. Okay, you should see it on both. Now, if you put a stereo instance of the plugin on a mono track, you may only see it on one side. But on the Slate one, you don't have to worry about that because it knows when it goes on the tracks whether it's mono or stereo. Unlike Waves, for example. Waves, they have a mono version and a stereo version, and you need to make sure that you pick the right version of the plugin. Does that make sense? Hope that makes sense. Okay. Let's see. Jim says, I've been messing around with soft tube tape on the mix effects track bus on Studio One. Yeah, I think that's a plugin that comes with Studio One. Yeah, that's a good plugin as well. Now remember, on the mix effects in Studio One, it's only on the buses. right? You can't put that plug-in on each individual track. It's only intended to be on the buses, which is totally fine, but that's the way it is. Paul Matthew, hey Paul, how are you? I picked up the mixing beginners pack last week, and I'm getting a lot out of it. Great. While I'm not a beginner, I'm still picking up a better skill set for implementing in the fundamentals. That's awesome. Thank you so much for picking it up. And yeah, that's great. The mixer beginners pack, even though it has the word beginners in it, it's not, as you just alluded to, it's not for, oh, you have to be an absolute beginner, and if you have any of experience, you won't learn anything from it. It goes beyond just the beginner stuff, as you kind of said. But I'm glad you're getting a lot out of it. Thanks so much. It's awesome. That's really, really great. Gabriel says, hey, how are you? How often are you putting the tape machine plug-in on your master bus in terms of percentage? Every time. Every time. I didn't do it in this demonstration because I wanted to focus on the tracks, but I don't know. I'm trying to think. I don't think there's ever been a time where I've not put it on the master bus, a tape machine on the master bus. Ever. If I'm using all in the box and I'm not running it through hardware, it's always going on the master bus, a tape machine. So yeah, that's the answer. Any other questions? We still got what, 68 or so people floating around? That's great. Cool. Very cool. Any questions? Any questions at all? Now's the time to ask. Now is the time to ask. Let me know. I'm here. We'll wait for the YouTube delay. No other questions? That's totally cool. If you guys have no other questions. Danny says, hey, Danny, as far as I know, the mix affects the gain staging on the individual tracks too. The mix effects, I'm not sure about that. You might be, you could be right about that. I don't know. I can't be sure of that without really thinking that through and reading up on that, because I don't use the mix effects in Studio One ever. So I'm not really sure functionality wise if that's right. You might be right about that though. You could be right. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just don't know that for sure. Arrow Proof says, thanks, Dave, you're the best. Thank you. I appreciate that. Paul says, when is the master chain? Where in the master chain do you put the tape? Last, before the limiter. The very last thing I hit is tape. Just like in an analog studio. Signal flows, last thing it goes on the tape. That's how I do it. Oh, Dave says nothing like a 60-second lag. Yeah. Let's see. Alistair says, on my virtual tape machine, only 1 meter responds to a mono signal is sent. Is there an internal setting I missed? Not that I'm aware of. I don't know. I've never had that problem myself, so I'm not really sure. No, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know. I've never had that issue, Alistair, to be honest. So I couldn't tell you, to be sure. You can check inside of the settings, but I don't think there's anything inside of the settings that would cause that. So I'm not really sure why that is. I've never had that problem where only one of the meters were moving. But I'm not sure. Let's see. If you download the Soft2, Bobby says, if you download the Soft2 tape from their website, you could put it on all the tracks. Oh, cool. Yeah, again, I know of the plugin. I think I've used it before. But yeah, I don't use that regularly. I have so many tape machines. It's not even funny. But that is a good tape machine plugin for sure. No doubt about that. Anything else? Any other questions? Anything else? Or should we head out of here? Alistair says, thanks for your feedback. Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for your questions. I do appreciate it. Hopefully you guys found this stuff informative and it is somewhat helpful. Again, like I said, make sure you're following me on all the social media platforms. Make sure that you go to Home Recording Made Easy. Get on the email list if you're not already, because if you're not on the email list, you won't receive the emails with the special deals, coupons, sales, and all that stuff, which go out a couple of 2-3 times a month. If you don't want to pay full regular price for the courses, you want to be on the email list as sales and coupons and deals come up, just like tonight with the Mixing with Analog Style plugins, where we talk about getting 25% off using ME25 off at checkout. So make sure you're there. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're on the email list so you know what is going on with all that stuff, right? And make sure you check out all the YouTube videos. Again, every tape machine that you saw tonight, I've done full demos on. They're on the YouTube channel. If you look at my playlists, I have tons of playlists. I have plug-in reviews by manufacturer. So you can look under the manufacturer's playlist, and their tape machine plug-in is in there. You can check it out. Cool? All right. So if we don't have any other questions, then we're going to head out for tonight. Again, I want to thank you so much for joining me. Stay close to your email. We'll be doing another one of these very, very soon, and maybe we'll pick up kind of where we left off tonight, and we'll check out some more stuff. Again, make sure you go out to the website. Make sure you pick up Mixing with Analog Style Plugins Made Easy. If you have any questions along the way, you can always hit me up through the website, through the email, through the contact us, and I'll be sure to help you with any of the problems that you might be having. And until next week, I've been Dave with HomeRecordingMadeEasy.com. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Dave, for monitoring the chat again. And I will see you guys all next time. Take care, everybody.